Battalion 301 to command. We have had structural collapse on the heliport side.
125 folks in the Pentagon died in the attack. 70 of those were civilian, 55 were uniform, 59 victims on the American Airlines 77, the youngest being a 2-year-old, the oldest being 80.
Minutes before the collapse of the Twin Towers, American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the west side of the Pentagon. After the initial impact, thousands of people evacuated the building, but a select few, the firefighters, police officers, and even military personnel, ran into it. Ryan Yantis was one of them.
I remember that there was smoke coming down from the ceiling, and there was a little bit of debris on my desk, which kind of threw me off. Finally got an outside line, called my wife, let her know that I was alive and making it out of the building in case she had seen it on TV. And then went back and started clearing offices back and forth on the E-ring, just making sure that everybody was out.
But the work didn't stop that day. Like several others, Ryan returned to duty on September 12th and continued to work in the Pentagon for the next 38 days.
We were assured that the air quality in the days after the attack, that they were monitoring it, and even though there was a lot of soot in the air.
It's a familiar story for the thousands of folks who worked in and around Ground Zero in Manhattan, too. The combination of building debris, burning jet fuel, and whatever else happened to be around did a number on the health of first responders and survivors of the attacks.
The first responders and those who worked at the site over the ensuing months had high exposure to dusts and chemicals there. Some of those included heavy metals and asbestos and silica.
That's Dr. Amy Hajari Case. She works with the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation.
So those people who had the highest level of exposure actually have some of the highest risk among those responders and survivors of developing lung involvement like pulmonary fibrosis later.
And then people develop something called the World Trade Center cough, particularly among firefighters.
And Dr. James Cohn, he's the medical director of the World Trade Center Health Registry, an organization dedicated to tracking and studying the health conditions of World Trade Center survivors.
Then there are people with more gastroesophageal reflux, or GERD, we call it. People with problems with sinus disorders, people with a lot of different respiratory problems.
I came down with throat cancer in 2007. It was tonsil cancer, stage 3B throat cancer at age 46. It's pretty daunting. Others that I know of in the Pentagon have had other medical challenges that are low percentage. Some of them can't share because they've passed. Diet, exercise, all those different factors. It's hard to say, okay, this caused cancer or not.
Now, over the past 2 decades, several organizations and even some legislation has been passed to provide survivors with resources or monetary compensation. But it's important to remember that the health impacts folks are still facing aren't just physical, they're mental too.
We had done some work with the Chicago FBI victim assistance folks several years previously, and out of that work, they came to consulting with us periodically. And so I know it was a week or two after 9/11, they called and said, we have these families here. So I recruited a couple people and we went in, and it was very clear after a 3-hour meeting that these folks were going to need support. And that's how it started.
Since the attacks, many survivors have been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, general anxiety, and in some cases, substance abuse. So teams like Norris's provided group therapy, individual counseling, and EMDR for families of victims and survivors. And in more recent years, they found something new to look for in their clients, and it's called post-traumatic growth.
Well, we've all been used to thinking about all the negative things that happened, and of course they were overwhelming and it was certainly a terrible event. However, these types of events in the past have been associated with some positive outcomes as people reflected on the events, struggled with the consequences, and were able to maybe shift their worldview and ways of approaching the world, creating new confidence. They survived this terrible event so they can maybe feel more confident in the future.
So here we are 20 years later, and we have survivors who are good friends, who are still together. And we have family members who years later at Willow House continue to get together because they created a bond of a shared experience. Where else would they go to get that?
I am a kind of a unicorn out here. Now, 20,000 people on duty in the Pentagon, and 19,000 of them did exactly what they were supposed to do that day. They evacuated the building and they either went home or went to some other place that they were told to work. And then there are the several hundred, I call them God's special little children. Yeah, we evacuated safely, now let's run back in and out of the building and try to help people. And out of that 500 or so, some of them have got amazing, compelling stories. I think mine's an interesting story, but I'm a witness to what they did. And I just try to share that so the American people know that as an artifact, as a living artifact, this is what it was like.